and I can probably say this too confidently, I don't think I see a Republican who voted against Gensler the first go around see what's happened the past 3 or 4 years and say, I'm actually going to go for change my vote and vote for him again. I have not seen that in my conversations with a variety of Senate offices. So he's losing folks, not gaining folks.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that I've been using since 2018. Uphold has all the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and all the altcoins. In fact, they have 260 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform. You can also trade precious metals, stablecoins, and 37 fiat currencies. In addition, they are available in over 150 countries. And this platform is fully reserved. They do audits, so you can trust that your funds are safe, no commingling, no lending out your funds. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond, who's the Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association. Ron, great to have you on.
Always great to be on, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Well, Ron, as I always say, you're the man to talk to because you got your finger on the pulse of what's happening in DC with crypto. So let's start with Gary Gensler. This week, the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, went on CNBC, reiterated his same statements about crypto and how he doesn't endorse Bitcoin and so forth. What were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, so we were watching that interview. I mean, he goes to CNBC and Squawk Box quite a decent amount. What struck me, though, was Joe Kern being a lot more, I guess you would push back, or I say aggressive maybe is another word for it. But the way that he was pushing on SEC chairman, I mean, again, usual reporters, they do push here and there, but this was a very firm line of questioning from Joe that was kind of shocking because, usually you want to give deference to the regulator, but he was really pushing, getting sort of saying, look, again, you're losing these court cases here. Your rationale and your logic is really starting to fall through. And I think that's kind of, at least for us personally, it was a sign of, hey, look how far we've come. Look, we're having even the anchors pushing back saying, like, look, I just think you're in the wrong here. And the way you're going about it just isn't working. And we're seeing that trickle to Capitol Hill a lot too, where, it's not just for crypto. It's the ESG front he's pushing heavily on that are really jeopardizing a lot of the moderate Democrats, especially in the Senate. There's also some other more sides of private equity and such, where there's a whole constituent of Republicans and Democrats who really care about that industry for their state or their district. So he's really making a lot of enemies, again, being very aggressive with his approach to regulation and regulation by enforcement for the case of crypto and rulemaking for the other industries. And so I think it's kind of a sign that, this man of coming as the white knight to save folks from private equity or from crypto, it hasn't really panned out. His also, I guess, his stature and demeanor is also a little more defensive, I would say. A lot more he was the arbiter of truth. And we're seeing now folks in the media and right on TV to his face really pushing back there. So again, it's a public perception battle. And I think we're starting to really make a turn, especially when it comes to the crypto side for the SEC. But does that trickle to policy? It's a little different. Obviously, legislation takes a long time, but I think the courts have really emboldened both folks just normally saying that I think the SEC is taking the wrong approach here. But at the same time, I'll saying it's pretty obvious your argument is not holding water here, and you keep doubling down on it. And it's a really risky strategy, and it's been really backfiring recently. So we'll see how this, she's going to be probably in front of the House Financial Services Committee as well as Senate Banking later on this year. He at least goes once a year. So I'm sure that's going to trickle to those hearings when we're going to see, again, Republicans and Democrats really hitting him and pushing back on how aggressive he's been on crypto and also the multitude of other issues within the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard question for you. We got the election coming up. Biden may win or he may lose. Now, let's say Biden does win. Do you think Gary Gensler will remain as chair of the SEC? We have rumors that he wants a Treasury job, but also, look, with all these bad optics and all these losses, Biden says, I'm bringing in someone else. What do you think?
No, it's a very real possibility. And I've been warning this, for a couple of years now, because if you recall, it depends on the nominee for each agency. The Senate is the one to confirm 100 votes. Some pass with 80 votes, some pass with 51. And then in some cases, they have failed. We've seen that happening at, I think, the Department of Labor and a few other agencies like the OCC, where they put a nominee up and they haven't been able to get enough Democrats to rally around their own. So it's very likely that the Senate will flip. West Virginia is going to go probably Republican, Montana potentially, Ohio potentially. So we're going to have Republicans in control. And if we have a Democrat administration, then we're going to have to find a way to get enough Republicans to support Gensler if he was going to go for that second term. I believe it was 6 Republicans last time voted for Gensler to be confirmed, including folks like Cynthia Lummis, who, like many in the industry, believe it's better to have someone who understands technology versus someone who doesn't. But obviously, we have someone who understands technology to an extent and has a vendetta, to say the least. And I think, again, especially with this issue, but also several others. I mean, take Kristen Gillibrand, for example, a pro-crypto Democrat. Will she vote for Gary Gensler next go around? It's unclear, but especially with ESG, with these other states, more moderate Democrats, they're probably going to push back and maybe not vote for him. So the math doesn't really add up for Chair Gensler if it's a Republican Senate. Again, a lot of things can happen in the meantime. We could still have 3 or 4 Republicans join the Democrats in supporting him. But if I were him, I would be very concerned about how aggressive the rulemaking is. And let's just say, even if it does stay Democrat in the Senate, there are enough vocal Democrats who have vocally been opposed to a lot of things Gary Gensler's doing on other sides that it could be enough to, even at this current, as the Senate is made up right now, let's say there was a vote to happen today on Gensler, it'd be a lot slimmer. If not, he may not even get 50 votes if it were held today, just because of the number of Democrats and Republicans who would probably change their view. And I can probably say this too confidently. I don't think I see a Republican who voted against Gensler the first go around see what's happened in the past 3 or 4 years and say, I'm actually going to go for change my vote and vote for him again. I have not seen that in my conversations with a variety of Senate offices. So he's losing folks, not gaining folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just seeing a lot of this playing out in the media, and there's so much coverage of these losses. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the DebtBox situation, where the judge is threatening to sanction the SEC lawyers. The SEC is asking for a voluntary dismissal. Is that echoing at all in DC? Are members of Congress picking up on that? Because it's like the arbitrary and capricious thing. I mean, it's just like they're lying to the courts.
Exactly. And I think Congress did pick up on it. And again, I want to focus on the Senate. Again, the Senate is the one that's important. I know the House can impeach certain agency heads. We saw that recently with DHS secretary, but that's going nowhere in the Senate. The Senate is the actual body that can vote to confirm or deny someone's position at an agency head. And we saw, I believe it was 4 to 5 Republicans send a letter to the SEC, to Gensler, on the DebtBox case, really highlighting the failed strategy on the legal front, and also just the posture of the SEC in terms of really being aggressive and both the leading up to this case itself and how they acted to the company. And we saw personal testimonies from those at DebtBox about how much it has affected their lives and their livelihood and their personal lives as well. And so it really struck a chord here in DC, especially, again, more on the Republican side, saying this is a pretty bad screw up. The courts are calling you out here, and we're doubling down to show that this is not unacceptable, and the regulation by enforcement is not working. And also, it is really dampening your ability to keep the SEC as this non-partial regulator, and the idea that they're technology neutral. It's very obvious that this is not as technology neutral of an agency, and they're willing to bend the rules in some cases to get the outcome that they want. And I think that's really has bitten them a lot recently. And we'll see if it happens in other cases. But it does really send a signal that there's a loss of confidence, especially within Congress and the Republican side, on the SEC's ability to properly police and properly follow the rules when it comes to this court case in particular, but other issues as well. Like take SAB 121, staff account and bulletin 121, where banks are having basically have to double count the crypto that they custody on their balance sheet. It's preventing BNY Mellon and others from getting into this space. And it just really hasn't made a lot of sense. And a lot of folks say, hey, look, I think we're going to have a legal action here. I think the banks and crypto are both united here. It's a pretty large force. Yeah. And the SEC decided to go with this rulemaking, and it was actually the Government Accountability Office at GAO. They basically said, actually, you should have gone to Congress and made sure that this was actually okay with them first. And Congress took notice. And so now there's Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate teaming up with this called Congressional Review Act. Basically, they're going to try to reverse the rule. And we've seen it done with other agencies in the past. It's not too often. Net neutrality was probably one of the biggest ones, and folks may remember years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But again, it is really sending a message that he is losing Democrats here. He's losing a lot of the support. And the champions for Gary Gensler, they're not as loud as they used to be. They're a lot smaller than they used to be as well. So very, treacherous area for Chair Gensler, especially as he heads into a potential renomination if Biden were to be the nominee, the president-elect come 2024 November.
So speaking of champions for Gary Gensler, Elizabeth Warren was, of course, peddling the Wall Street Journal data about Hamas using crypto for nefarious activities and so forth. But yesterday, or I should say this week, Tom Emmer had a Treasury representative. There was a hearing confirm that it's very limited, and of course, the majority of these things are done in cash and fiat. What were your takeaways from that?
Yes, definitely. So I think the really important thing to highlight, especially when it comes to hearing it from a government official versus hearing it from someone in the industry, is that this is a matter of fact here. And of course, there's always an angle a lot of agencies take, but especially when it comes to Treasury, facts are facts, and they're very much cognizant of that. We might disagree with some views, but at the end of the day, they have the facts here, and they can see a lot of the data sets, and they have explicitly testified in front of Congress on Wednesday saying that, that Wall Street Journal report, they didn't say Wall Street Journal explicitly, I believe, but they just said reports in the media are definitely overblown. And it's a little frustrating in terms of it took, almost 6 months to get to that point. And at least on Capitol Hill, both, within the congressional offices like McHenry and Hill, and also within the industry itself, like Blockchain Association and other groups and companies, and folks in the media as well, they have been really pushing back on this narrative and have shown factual proof that has been disproven. And Elizabeth Warren doubled down. And I think actually one of the worst things that she did in terms of just like political missteps here was the calling out the national security advisors who is co-signed our letter. And we sent a letter to Elizabeth Warren pushing back on that narrative. We came back with the facts. And we thought it'd be better to have folks who used to work at DOJ, FBI, FinCEN, Treasury, those who actually were working in the government, who saw this, who have probably know other things that are more in a classified setting, and they're pushing back on that. And she didn't. Her response, and she decided to respond, was more calling out those individuals and saying, "You're tainted because you work for the crypto industry." And I love a lot of folks who responded back saying, "Hey, look, actually, I love my country. I don't abandon my principles for joining a private sector. Like I'm here to advance American values, American ideals, American businesses." So it's a little hypocritical. And in fact, some of the folks yesterday, I was at a hearing in the House on crypto crime. Some of the very folks who signed that letter were the ones pushing back on that narrative, and they did it in a very I wouldn't say sincere manner. And a lot of them were saying, look, during my time at X agency or X law enforcement group, I saw this and it was not the case that, or as large as Elizabeth Warren is portraying it as. And the last thing I will say is, I think folks have started to realize, we saw this from day one, but this is kind of the reality, is that whenever there's a political opportunity, we've seen Elizabeth Warren and other crypto skeptics really jump on the national security emergency and blame crypto. And again, 2 years ago, Russia invades Ukraine. It was crypto who was responsible for it for some of these folks. It took about 6 months, but we had the facts, disproven it. And now October 7th happened. It took about 6 months, and now we've finally rolled back of, okay, that was the wrong assumption here. And it is a little frustrating that every single time there's a global crisis, especially in this stage, that there is someone who says it's crypto's problem. And usually they don't have enough facts or circumstances to really justify that. And they might have some data sets, but they don't have the full picture. And, when it takes time to get the full picture, you get the whole data sets, you get the government actually weighing in here and pushing back on those narratives. It feels great as to see all the work pay off. But at the same time, we've kind of lost 6 months here where now folks are throwing roadblock after roadblock. No, we don't need stablecoin legislation. We need to worry about the money laundering. And that has been really frustrating because now that we've worked 6 months to get to the point of defeating this narrative and showing the facts. And again, it's not like our story won, it's our facts, our facts. The government's facts showed it. We had to go back to now saying, all right, let's go back to stablecoins. Let's go back to SAB 121. Let's go back to market structure. Let's go back to actually getting Congress to move here. And it is a little frustrating, but that's how politics works sometimes.
Yeah, it is frustrating, but like you said, the facts are were giving us the victory here, even though it's painful to go through the process. The facts are on our side. Now, something interesting. Well, at least I found it interesting. Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, was before the House 2 weeks ago, and she called distinctly for Congress to pass regulations for stablecoins and crypto spot markets. Twofold question. What were your thoughts on that? And is this maybe a bit of a pivot by the Biden administration because they see Elizabeth Warren is lying? They see Gary Gensler is taking losses. The election's coming up that they want to get some things done here.
Yeah, I think it's a combo of a lot of things, but I will say, Janet Yellen has been saying this for quite some time. She said that Congress needs to act. She's testified that before. I think it was last year. She said the same thing. The Presidential Working Group on Stablecoins in 2021 December said the exact same thing. Mm. This is what we can do as regulators, but we have a gap, and Congress needs to fill it with stablecoin regulation and legislation. And Maxine Waters from the House Democrats, she was working on some effort up there. McHenry has taken over that effort since the Republicans took over Congress and the House. Mm. And we are seeing, at least in the House is a very different story than the Senate. The House, on both sides of the aisle, there is a recognition that stablecoin legislation needs to get done. And there is a difference of opinion on a few things here and there, like, it should be the states who are the main regulator, should it be the Fed who's the main regulator. So there are still these hurdles, and they've existed for about almost 9 months now. There are reports that there is some coalition of an agreement of sorts. From my sources, it's still not official yet. There's still a lot they're working out. But when you pivot over to the Senate, it's a completely different story. That committee, even though they cover the same exact topics, they're talking about housing and fentanyl, which are very important issues, but they're very much in the different polar opposite of priorities here. And so we haven't seen stablecoin legislation really percolate to the chair level, Chair Brown, the man who decides what gets voted on, what doesn't get voted on in the Senate for at least banking issues. We haven't seen him really focus on this issue. And we've seen Treasury and very other agencies really loudly state, we need this from Congress. We need this now. Otherwise, we're going to have to act as much as we can. And that's the unfortunate situation. At least in Congress, especially when it comes down to the hierarchy of things, it can take just one individual to really put a slowdown on legislation. And of course, there are ways to try to get around that, and we've been exploring that for quite some time. But I think that, the thing to highlight is that the House, on both sides of the aisle, recognize that this is a major issue. The Treasury Department and the other regulators say we need stablecoin legislation, and the Senate is still that large roadblock right now. And McHenry and others are trying to overcome it, and we're trying to assist in any way we can. But at the end of the day, one man can really hold up a lot in the Senate on a variety of topics. And in this case, it's a lot of the crypto legislation. Mind you, again, though, a lot of it hasn't come out of the House yet. It still needs to go through the whole House process. But usually you kind of see a simultaneous effort in the Senate saying, hey, look, this is going to come down the pipeline. Let's start getting our ducks in a row in terms of what our priorities are when it comes to stable coins or crypto. And that just hasn't happened yet in the Senate.
Yeah, because I saw a Politico report yesterday highlighting Patrick McHenry stating that him and Maxine Waters are aligned on stablecoin regulations. So, man, fingers crossed that, even if it just gets out of the House, that would be a big victory, because then the next hurdle is just the Senate. But it just has to get out the House, right? Which it seems to be the easier path for now, at least a less difficult.
Yeah, so I'll push back a little bit on there's an agreement so far with McHenry and Waters on stablecoins. Again, the Fed is in the room, Treasury's in the room. From my sources, talking to camps or folks in all these camps here, there's not a full agreement yet. There's agreement they got to do something. There's agreement on most things, but there's still a couple of hiccups allegedly. So once those get ironed out, we can hopefully soon. It's been a couple months, but the talks are happening, and we hope that happens soon. I do think we'll see a House floor vote on stablecoins. I do think we'll see a House floor vote on market structure, and same with SAB 121. Unclear if it's all going to be one big bill. They're going to combine together, or it's going to be separate bills. But I think by springtime we're going to have a vote on crypto legislation, and one of those three buckets are all three. And then the pressure is going to be really put on the Senate. But the one other factor taking all this is the House is in complete disarray. The government shuts down March 2nd. The Congress just left yesterday for 2 weeks, at least for the House. Senate's only a week. And they're going to go back to the funding the government. This is like the fifth third government funding fight we've had the past year. It takes up a lot of time. And then we go back to doing the same thing over and over again. And again, a large part of this is just the House Republicans largely not being able to get their act together. They're dealing with also the thinnest margin ever for a congressional majority. It's only, I think, 3 seats right now. And there's enough folks, more than 3, who cause problems. And that's why the House has been in such a disarray. So we have to take into consideration, even if McHenry is able to get an agreement, he has to also try to find time to find a vote time slot in the House, which is surprisingly difficult. They map out these votes months in advance. And of course, everything gets jumbled up. But the question is, McHenry is in his last year and he is pushing hard. And candidly, too, the House Republicans own, because he held the speakership for when the ship was sinking to sorts back in October and September of last year. So they do owe some deference. He has definitely bought a lot of goodwill on both sides of the aisle, but there is a lot of other general political mess, including the shutdown, Ukraine, Israel, the border, that has really thrown time off for a loop. So we could be, having the same conversation in 3 months. It's just, unfortunately, the politics has gotten really nasty, and it's not crypto. It's just everything else that's happening. And a lot of that's the election too, fueling that.
Ron, sometimes I get so discouraged with government, not just specific crypto, but like, all these other things, because they just can't get their act together.
Yeah. Well, I will say, hey, Congress still acts faster than the courts. I know a lot of folks are saying, let's just screw all DC, let's go to the courts. Let's also remember, the courts, you don't know what the outcome is. It's not as transparent. And at least in Congress, you can see the amendments, you can see the bills. These things take time. There is a pathway here. So, I want to make sure folks understand, at least in Congress, we have a lot more of a sense of, when things are moving, and they're slowly moving, but they're moving. And at least we know what the outcome is going to be largely. Whereas the courts, it can go in a lot of directions, and that can really throw in a wrench into many things. So if you think the courts are going to get something done, the Coinbase case could be another 3 years plus. So let's not forget, Congress actually might be faster despite all this hecticness going on.
Oh, man. I want to get your thoughts on Attorney John Deaton potentially signaling that he may run against Elizabeth Warren. And of course, he's been a champion in the crypto industry, in the Ripple case and in other things as well. And any thoughts on that, or is it too early to kind of speak on this?
I know John through a lot of his work with Ripple and the XRP Army, and a lot on Twitter and his book as well. He's got a great story. I think, and I've ran campaigns before. My time in politics, I ran 3 state Senate campaigns in Texas. Campaigns are tough. And Elizabeth Warren has a war chest. She's also got name ID. She has recognition. We have had conversations with candidates on both sides of the aisle who have expressed, they don't like her approach, or they don't think she's the right fit for Massachusetts. But when they did the math, it does get a little difficult. She does seem to be pretty entrenched, and you need to build, years to get name recognition to really unseat folks. And also, too, I will say, likes on Twitter don't always equate to votes. But at the same time, I think it's important that, John is publicly saying this, because we've had a lot of private conversation with folks, some who are serving in Congress, some who want to serve in Congress, obviously. And a lot of times you just see a really daunting figure of Elizabeth Warren. And for years, a lot of folks were scared just to attack not just her because it's a tough race to begin with, but because of the political backlash, especially for Democrats, from a very, large progressive champion for some folks. So I think it's really good to see John publicly saying, hey, look, I'm not happy with how the direction of the state is going, or at least what the senator is taking our state. I think I can do better. We'll see if he launches a campaign. But I will say, again, these usually take years to form, and especially in the Senate, it takes millions of dollars. So it'll be a tough slog. But who knows? Maybe he doesn't go this year, but in 6 years, he comes back, and he's built more of a recognition, and a lot of folks in Massachusetts support him. But I will also say, too, let's not forget the Democrat side of the aisle. I will stress, we have talked to several Democrats who want to run for that seat. Mm. And there have been, for various reasons why they didn't decide this was the right time. But that could change in the next couple of years.
Yeah, maybe John putting out the signal out there will bring in the rest of the folks, right? Because then you start to build kind of the opposite faction of it, that, hey, all these people are trying to get that seat, and maybe it's time for Elizabeth Warren to move on, right? If it's it's tough. But if you get a group, it's different.
And I will say she has made a lot of enemies, and like, kind of like Gensler, and a lot of very powerful, in some cases, very rich enemies. And so it's also important to take in consideration. There's the banks, private equity. There's, I guess what was the other one that she was a big sandwich? I guess they were focusing on. There's a whole cohort of folks.
Doritos, Oreos.
Exactly. She has really made a lot of enemies. But again, she's also been, there's a lot of consumer groups and a lot of folks on the progressive side who do look up to her as the leader. So, but if you want to look for, funding for a campaign is always the toughest part. But when you have folks with deep pockets, especially industries that have been the target for a lot of her attacks that have led to policy, I mean, take Bitcoin mining, for example. Like a lot of her efforts have started what we're starting to see over at the EPA now of trying to, regulate more and more on the mining side. And that's just one industry. There are several other out there, including AI now recently. So I think it's important just to understand there is a base of support. There are folks who are waiting on the sideline, and John taking that first public step could make a lot more folks interested in joining or at least supporting someone who wants to take her out. So your point, I think it's a really good, at least move forward and to show her, hey, look, you're on your watch. If you think your seat is a guaranteed, that's never the case. The voters are always watching.
For sure. Final question here. Are there any upcoming hearings around crypto that we should pay attention to or be on the lookout for?
I'm not sure if it's publicly announced yet, but Jerome Powell, I mean, he usually comes in around this time anyway, but we do expect Jerome Powell to be in front of the House and the Senate, likely in March, probably a more early March timeframe. So we could see conversations, especially on stablecoins, where the Fed is such an important piece of this negotiation. And then again, there's been reports that there's an agreement. I have heard from close sources on multiple camps, it's not a full deal yet. And the Fed obviously is one of those folks in the room. So I would watch that hearing. It looks like, at least for the House, we're probably largely done with the digital asset hearings when it comes to crypto. I think we're going to see a little more pivot to AI, especially with a lot of the news recently with OpenAI and their new upgrades. And a lot of folks in Capitol Hill really were talking about that a lot yesterday, actually, when I was over there. So I think we're going to see a little more pivot on AI from the House side. The Senate is probably the last thing I would look at. Senate banking, they're focusing on housing right now, but there's been a lot of conversations about what does money laundering legislation look like. And Treasury gave some proposals out there. They're pretty far-reaching in terms of what they want to expand their authority to. So I do think we'll have more action in the Senate in terms of hearings, but I would also look to the House for votes on stables, market structure, and staff account and bulletin 121, probably around the summertime, springtime. And then with the other additional caveat, it's election year and the House Republicans are in a mess. So a lot of things can get screwed up. So I don't want to take my word for truth here. But that's kind of what we're seeing, at least right now, as the ground swells. And at least we're in a little bit of a holding pattern until they fund the government March 2nd.
Oh man, Ron, I'm going to try to remain as optimistic as possible, send positive energy to DC, that they can get their act together and do some of these things in, not just crypto, but take care of the other stuff too, right? We got to function.
We got to function. We got to support our allies. We got to secure the border. We got to keep our economy going. There's a lot of things so when you have these really big issues, it's really hard to say, but wait, crypto. And that's kind of like, we have to do that balancing act too. McHenry's doing the same thing. You just can't say, hey, look, the border's a mess, or, we're having issues with our allies who are fighting these wars. And then someone says, but before we touch any of that, let's touch crypto. Like that just doesn't work out like that politically. And those who do that usually are scoffed immediately in the press and internally. So McHenry's playing his cards right. It's just really a very unfortunate situation with a split Congress and so many pressing issues and an election year. It's a really bad combo.
Ron, always great insights and information. Thank you so much, my friend.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.